and I run this series with my colleagues here, and they will all introduce themselves. Let me, before we start, introduce the series, and then my colleague Hatoun will introduce the speaker. So, empowering Muslim women in scientific research. This series first started in December 2021 at the University of Manchester, and it was a platform launched to explore the place of MENA women in history, as well as in the present, across various arenas, including literature, art, history, and sciences. The series included speakers from across the MENA region, including the Gulf region, as well as the Western world. Through multi and interdisciplinary, distinctive, innovative, and creative approaches to their fields, researchers deconstructed prevalent stereotypes about Muslim women and emphasized their diversity. The series stopped for a year, and then we have relaunched it this year from a joint platform, which is between the University of Manchester and the University of Sharjah. And we are now at number 6. And we have the honor today to welcome Dr. Mariam Karim to give us the 6th lecture titled Excavating Early 20th Century Arab Women's Media, Methodological Reflections. So I will hand over to my colleague Hatoun to introduce the author. Over to you, Hatoun.
Thank you, Zahia. Hello, everyone. This is Hatoun Al-Fasi. I join you from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I'd like to introduce Dr. Mariam Karim, who is a global postdoc scholar at the Institute for Advanced Study in the Global South at Northwestern University in Qatar, and is the founder of the Digital Humanities Project Nasawiya, which is an Arab media history. She's a member of the steering council of the Archive and Digital Media Lab, and she has completed her PhD at Toronto University at the Faculty of Information and Women and Gender Studies Institute. She served as an inaugural graduate fellow at the University of Toronto's Critical Digital Humanities Initiative and was the recipient of the Social Science and Humanities Research Council Doctoral Award. Her research agenda explores Arab women's media from the 20th century. She situates contemporary uses of digital media through historical inquiry and studies Arabic mass media in the context of media imperialism and colonialism. You can read her work at different platforms such as Communication and Culture, Critique, First Monday, and Nasawiya. Dr. Mariam, the floor is yours. You have 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will open the stage for questions. Could you unmute yourself and share your presentation?
See my PowerPoint? Is it visible to you?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Hatoun. It's really an honor for me to be with you and Dr. Zahia, and for inviting me in this very special space. I appreciate not only the difficulties in organizing events like this, but also the significance of them, Muslim women and beyond, and expanding transnational conversations and knowledges and ideas. And so I really appreciate being here, and also for everybody that joined, I appreciate your time, and hopefully you'll learn something new, or maybe we can continue this conversation beyond this space. But I will talk a little bit about some of the questions I've had navigating, studying the history of Arab women, specifically through a media studies lens. As Dr. Hatun mentioned, I did my PhD at the Faculty of Information, which is a department that trains librarians and archivists, as well as media studies scholars, and we also have, a few other museum studies and so on. And I entered the PhD with working with Dr. Nadia Kaidi, who's a prominent library and information studies scholar. And it was at that time I started to really and think about and investigate the role that libraries and, knowledge institutions have in how we understand, record, and write history. Within this space, starting as a media studies scholar, thinking about digital media, I was wondering, what is the history of these media phenomenons, and what can we learn by following through the traces that have been left behind about this very expansive and deep history indeed. So when I'm there, I met Dr. Nadia Kaidi, who then introduced me to Dr. Jamila Ghaddar, who is an archival studies scholar. So I started to, get deeper into these disciplines that were different than my own at the time. And this is something also in terms of like a lot of us researching Arab women's histories or any kind of marginalized history, indigenous histories, the idea of multidisciplinarity becomes very important. I won't ramble too much, so I'll stick back to my script. But I arrived at this from this context and from this place, and I will give some examples today about the trajectory of the evidence that I found. And so I focus on the period of the turn and the early 20th century, and specifically the print activities of women from Bilad al-Sham, that is Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine, as a means to expand and deepen our knowledge on not only how Arab women built or contributed to the production of Arab media during the proliferation of print culture in the region, but also what their intellectual contributions were and how big of a role does the affordance of writing magazines and publishing has in terms of disseminating this feminist consciousness and knowledge. And that's kind of the focus of the discussion. So whether through speeches, transcripts of speeches, magazine articles, books, and of course other works. Later I talk about broadcasting, although I won't focus on this today. The work of excavating this history, or at least how I hope to practice it, or my aim or the niyyah behind it, comes from a decolonial archival praxis perspective. And this approach to going into these libraries and archival institutions, personal bookstores, these spaces to try to piece together different stories, and I will share, of course, this, offers us another lens. It refers to, and as Jamila Ghaddar writes, the innumerable and intertwined material and immaterial traces left by anti-colonial figures and decolonial movements in the 20th century around the globe. So as a method to think of the decolonial archival praxis, it requires that we center indigenous people and their knowledges, and a commitment in this research, in this practice, to dismantling, and I quote, dismantling structures and systems of oppression and domination. So counter to the traditional or the colonial methodology in which historians disappear records and archives, and the context around how we arrived to these materials, considering this in the conversation and the narration and the historical trajectory and the circumstances around both the story of what happened and the archive and the record by which we arrive to the story, it becomes very significant and much more encompassing and more reflective of the realities of both the researcher and the text. So studying the history of Arab women's media in Bilad al-Sham, specifically, as I say.
Mariam, do you want to move the presentation? The slides?
We can. Yes. We can, yes. Thank you for reminding me. It's a very difficult task. You know, when I first started, people thought, oh, no, you're not going to find anything. Of course, and I found a lot, as you all know, in this space. I don't need to tell you. And it involves a range of different strategies, people, travel, and feminist commitments. And of course, yani, as I said, a lot of you have contributed to building this knowledge within your own work across different borders and countries, and it's actually very difficult to navigate these borders, considering how I will expand on this in a second. And talking about this history today, in the context of what is happening now within this space, this land, starting from Gaza, in which, the Israeli genocide, women are experiencing unfathomable, horrific conditions in which entire families, journalists, and writers are assassinated, amidst ongoing land grabs of what is called a plan for a greater Israel from Gaza across Bilad al-Sham, villages, archives, libraries, media facilities, museums, and archaeological sites dating thousands of years continue to be destroyed on a daily basis. So within this, again, time and place, the urgency of safeguarding women's histories, archives, and cultural heritage is as urgent today as it was for the women that I study during the early 20th century, who themselves were also going through very difficult conditions amidst changing colonial borders and horrors. And as Nawar Gholi writes in her article, Is Feminism Relevant to Arab Women? The truth of the matter is that the immediate boundaries between any two Arab countries are the result of the Western imperialist policy of divide and rule. So the continuities of the struggles of, those early 20th century Arabiyat and our current context bring forward, for us at least, a need to look into this history to understand how they dealt with the struggles of their time, what writings and media strategies did they use, and how can this help us to intervene for the present and the future for liberation from patriarchal and colonial domination. So I put here an idea of the trajectory of this presentation in the slide, and I want to go to a very important question that is inspired from Fatma Marnisi's question around controlling our own images. Who are we if we don't control our own narratives? Fatma Marnisi asked the question, who are we if we don't control our own images? She asked this question in her book, Shahrazad Goes West, in which she travels to France and the US to try to understand the Western conception of Arab women and Muslim women in art and literature. And she, facing a painting of a North African woman in which what she was looking at was so far removed from her own experience as a North African Maghribi woman, she writes that, she felt that she was faced with unarmed political violence. That's how bad the manipulation of images was for her representation, in terms of, she described that. So I just wanted to add this to say that there is urgency in controlling our own narratives, especially in the face of erasure and masculinist readings that really erase from the fact of, Anjad women have contributed so much intellectually to how we understand social justice, economics, and literature, and all these different fields and sciences and so on. I have here Arabiya. I talked about decolonial archival praxis at the bottom, and I have Arabiya epistemologies And in order to answer the question, who are we if we don't control our own narratives, or how do we control our own narratives, I go to Dr. Manal Hamza's work, in which she asserts and calls for the expansion of Arabiya epistemologies. So in her book documenting the shahadat of survivors of sexual violence in the Egyptian Revolution, Hamza argues that in the case of Arab women, or Nasawiya epistemology, centering the Arab term Arabiya, here meaning Arab feminism, in the Western Academy, and using the Arabic in English productions of our knowledge is, and I quote, an Arabiya defiance to the dominance of English as a colonialist language in the Academy of the Global North. So to answer the question, how do we control our narratives, I visit Manal Hamza's call to assert and center Arabiya epistemology. So if we follow that, what is the counter narrative? And this is kind of the heart of my methodology that I hope is proves fruitful. I will present you an example now. I talked about, me trying to, trace the history through archival praxis, and, in doing that, one becomes, familiar with how others throughout history have traced the stories of the women of previous generations. The first recorded book of Arab women's biographies, produced by Mariam Nahas, entitled معارض الحسناء في تراجيم مشاهير النساء, the dictionary of the exemplary in the lives of women, was written by Mariam Nahas in 1879. There is accounts that a second book was also written by Mariam Nahas, although I couldn't find the first book of 1879, and it is recorded in the history books that the second book was lost, but I still cannot find the first book that Mariam Nahas wrote, which is a biographical book profiling Eastern women. So I'm looking, for Mariam Nahas's book, couldn't find it, but what I was able to find, and this is thankfully due to the digitized archival records of Samrat al-Funun magazine at the American University of Beirut. It was a project, and I want to give a shout out for Basma Shibani and Fatma Sharafuddin, who worked on digitizing this material for us. In the digitized record of the magazine Tamrat al-Funun, there is an advertisement that Mariam Nahas wrote about producing her book. So this has become my main record. Why did Mariam Nahas produce this biographical book? What was the intention behind it? And of course, at that time, it's a very big feat, to produce something like this. But what can we learn from this ad in order to try to deepen our knowledge about this book that exists, but I have not found it, right? Maybe you guys can help me, and this is kind of what I hope to gain from this interactions, of course. So in the ad, and within this specific edition, I believe it was the only excerpt or piece written by a woman within this specific edition of the magazine. It's a 347 word promotional advertisement she wrote offering pre-order sales for the book. Thamarat al-Funun magazine was published in Beirut, and the ad explains that the funds gathered from the pre-order sales will help her write this feminist dictionary. She explains that her project is divided in two parts, 500 pages each, with photographs and profiles of Arab and Persian women. To her astonishment, she writes in the ad, the topic of Arab and Persian women's history has not been covered in French books, despite, and I quote a translation from the ad, all they have and the abundance of resources, women writers and publishers. She describes that her contribution fills in this gap in the knowledge, and she hopes that her feminist project, and I quote, inspires women of the East. She goes on to explain that the aim of the book was to revive the secrets of history and stories of women from our history who, and I quote, and this is my translation, who empowered themselves with the right of authority, as-sulta, and sovereignty, as-siyada. So, Nahas writes that she has taken it upon herself to write this dictionary that is well organized and easy to read resource as a means to encourage Banat Watani, women of my country, to aspire to seek the ranks of their predecessors, if not higher. So the ranks of their predecessors, if not higher. This short ad is revealing of the ways in which early feminist biographers use magazines as a means to gather interest and financial resources to promote and produce their works. So as I said, historians have noted that the first volume published in 1879 and the second was lost during the Arabi nationalist revolt in Egypt. The book was printed and produced in Egypt. And it was, of course, not a simple thing that she not only put this ad out, but produced this book. And an interesting anecdote about Mariam Nahas is that the first women's magazine produced in Egypt was by her daughter, Hind Naufal. It was called Al-Fatat in 1892, and it was also launched from Egypt, and its influence marked the beginning of a longer history of women's magazines in the region. The second biographical book similar to Mariam Nahas, written in Arabic, was by Zainab Fawaz, and I will get to the details of this in a second. But when Hind Naufal, Mariam Nahas's daughter, I hope you're following with me because I don't want to, Mariam Nahas's daughter, Hind Naufal, who founded Al-Fatat magazine, when she created the magazine, Zainab Fawaz congratulated her. She wrote a poem for her. And in the poem, Fawaz celebrates Naufal's efforts for the magazine and describes it as an achievement for all Arab women writing, "Here Hind Naufal came to rejoice her girl. She came adorned with all the virtues, bringing together her culture, the eloquent Arabs." So like Al-Nahas's ad, in which she outlines that her motivations for the book was to inspire Banat Watani, the women of my country or nation, however you want, Fawaz considers the feminist magazine Al-Fatat as uniting force, bringing together Arab women wherever they may be, and a historical milestone in the history of Arab culture. And we have to recognize this is in the context in which Arabic language, cultural production was under threat, whether first in Bilad al-Sham, which is why they published from Egypt, under Turkification, and then under the French and the British. So this is, the concept behind why it was such a big feat, not only because it was a women's one of the first women's magazines. And I don't like to say the first, because you always find other things, but, it is recognized as the first. So after Mariam Nahas writes her biographical book about Arab and Persian women, the second book of such a style is written by Zainab Fawaz, and it was 15 years after Nahas published her dictionary. It's called Ad-Dar al-Mantur fi Tabaqat Rabbat al-Khudur, and which translates to pearls scattered in times and places, classes of ladies of cloistered paces. And I believe this is the translation I got from Marilyn Booth's discussion about this. In 1894, so Nahas 1879, Fawaz 1894. The book is aimed at helping the reader fill in the gaps in history, as she writes. Fawaz argued that if we learn more about women from history globally, we can arrive at a clearer picture of how history unfolded. And it's also said that the word choice for the title Scattered Pearls signals to the fragmented nature of conducting historical research about women and the gaps in history that, in turn, this knowledge can fill, but also produces. It produces knowledge gaps in history with the exclusion of this knowledge, and then adding it fills in these gaps. It includes 456 profiles, and it kind of became, these are the first two texts. I bring them in because, of course, as many of you here know, the writing Arab women's biographies and autobiographies is a very prominent style within this canon of Arab, what I call Arab women's media, because they wrote about each other in the press. They released letters of exchanges between each other. So it's a really significant style, and giving it attention is important. And I want to again talk about the idea of the anti-sira that Dr. Nawar Gholi talks about, in which she says that there's revolutionary value in preserving and centering the memories of people and the struggle through, and the autobiography or the biography not only tell us the stories about women's lives, but also the surroundings, the historical and the political and the social and the family, economic context of their lives. So in this sense, the biographical account or autobiographical account challenges individualistic and patriarchal narratives in which writing about the self or women of earlier generations, at least in my understanding, extends far beyond the self and towards advancing and instilling a general feminist consciousness. And again, we saw this in how Fawaz talked about her work, and has also talked about why she produces this knowledge. Of course, we have to talk about another pioneer. I don't like the word pioneer. It's very colonial sentiment in the word, but Arabiya, revolutionary, we can say, amongst the other revolutionaries, is of course May Ziadeh, who dedicated a lot of her body of work of writing biographical books about other Arab women writers. And I want to mention that May Ziadeh decided to write in Arabic, although she was not trained in Arabic. She was educated in French, first in a missionary school in Palestine and then in Lebanon. And she was much more comfortable writing in French. But she says that she went to see a lecture by a feminist, Labiba Hashim, and she went home and she saw that some people in the audience were not taking the lecture seriously. She was very frustrated, and she went home and she decided that she's going to start writing in Arabic. So she started learning Arabic, how to write well at an older age. And she writes in some of her speeches that she had a broken accent. Her Arabic was not very good, but she maintained this commitment to writing in Arabic language. And of course, now she's widely recognized as a very important figure in Arabic literature. Anyway, so as part of this, of course, May Ziadeh wrote about other Arab women writers, including Bahithat al-Badia, Malak Hifni Nasif, who they exchanged letters and talked about issues in terms of, marriage and men's, what they called, they write about the patriarchal system, and men, in terms of by enslaving us, they're also enslaving themselves. And that's something, we can maybe touch about in the Q&A. But in this slide, I have here an excerpt from a eulogy that May Ziadeh wrote about Warda al-Yazigi. She published it first in the Al-Muqtataf, I believe, magazine. And then she also included it in her book about Warda al-Yazigi. And it's a book called Warda al-Yazigi. And in her, in the eulogy, she says, and I'm going to read it as much as I can from it. I have only time to indicate in passing my esteem of what women from earlier generations have done to open up the way for us. I say open up the way, even though all they did was put up a signpost at the threshold of unknown territories. However, this signpost has value and use, especially when we remember when it was put up. So I want to pause here for a second and come back to the core, I guess, discussion of the talk, which is, methodologies, research methodologies and methods, and archival research, and so on. The signposts, whether it's the ad from Mariam Nahas or even this eulogy from May Ziadeh and others, as I describe later on, are very, how can I explain the feeling of trying to arrive to collecting and writing this history through scattered knowledge and, in the context of war and so much suffering, but also so much resilience in maintaining and building counter narratives. So I feel this, what May is urging here is to keep up in recording and furthering the resources we have for this history. Another point about the signposts, and this is more a literal way, is so Imtiaz Nahal Zarib wrote a book about Palestinian women, and she was in Gaza when she wrote it. And in 2013, I believe, in a radio interview with her, so again, scattered, I look at radio interviews as well with some of the writers if I can't access the book, so I go see, what are some interviews that we've had. So in a radio interview with her, which is recorded and put on YouTube, she, they ask her, how did you write this book? What are some of the struggles of writing the book? Of course, she described, the difficulties of printing. She had to, of course, pay for the entire printing of the book. She couldn't, move it outside of Gaza and so on. But one of the things that she also mentioned was that it was in order to trace the profiles of Palestinian women, one of the ways she used was she followed the names of the schools. So in Palestine, a lot of the schools were established by women and as part of the women's movement and the feminist unions and so on. So she started to locate the schools in Palestine and the history of the schools in Palestine, and that led her to the names of important figures and so on. So this is also a signpost, right, to the locations of the places and what this tells us not only about the land that the school was on, but also the school, the history of the school, the way it was established, who established it, what is the context, there's so much there. And so here, I just want to quickly say here, we have the radio interview. This is from a digitized copy of May Ziady's book, but also we have, copies, of course, available. More or less, her work is more available maybe than others. I'm talking about May Ziady. This also was digitized, and this copy here was from the Qatar National Library. They have a nice display, actually, about women writers there in the bottom floor, if you ever visit. And this, as I said, was from the Arab American University of Beirut digitized collection. So I've kind of covered a little bit some of the examples from like an Arabic resources and literature perspective. I want to move on now. The second part of my presentation is my experience, at least a humble experience, of course, in looking at the Colonial Archive, the British National Archives, the London School of Economics Women's Library Archive, and how the Arab women were mentioned within those records. And that was very interesting, of course. It really was for me, because there was a lot there that gave context to the Arabic counter-narrative that really enriched the counter-narrative and, deepened it, of course, because we are looking at it from all sides in the sense of, the erasure, how they are erased, but also why this happened. And so I'm just going to tell you the story. So one of the stories, of course, there are many, that was interesting. Here I have a letter. This is a letter from Lorna Bardi, reporting back to Miss Nealance. And Lorna was a missionary as part of the abolitionist missionary work against prostitution or something like this in Syria. And her role was to, engage with Syrian women and build some sort of Syrian women's collective based on, their missionary work. In these letters, the ways in which they talk about the difficulties that they had in trying to build this relationship with the Arab women was very revealing. it was revealing because, you know, while they say that nobody wants to come to these meetings, they are lazy, nobody wants to translate, you know, it's very hard to find someone to translate for you here, you know, things like, you know, I call a meeting and nobody shows up, and so on. These are signs of refusals, because we know that in this same time period, 1934, the Syrian women's movement was very active. Translation was a very important part of this movement because, of course, if women are literate and they spoke more than one language, that was a big asset for them, because it was a way for them to speak back, not only in their native language, but also in the French language and the British language, to have their demands directly with the colonial government and not mediated by anyone. This was very important for them. So when we see these kinds of examples, and maybe I'll stick to my script a little bit just to be more specific here. Where is it? She says, you know, here she's writing speeches for Miss Rashani, and you know, this is one example here that I wanted to share with you. I just want to find the exact. I had an issue, sadly, with my printer, and so I don't have an issue with this. But another example I have is, as I mentioned, the translation piece. And I want to pause about the translation for a second, because in this record, they talk about here. So they translated a pamphlet to Arabic from French, and the first of its kind, a translation of the adaptation of the French one entitled La traite des femmes devant la société des nations. The French edition has gone down awfully well here. In the Arabic, we omitted the law section, which does not apply here and which is far too subtle for the Syrian public. So they omitted the part in the translation that talks about the application of law. What does this mean? And in the French version, when we talk about French subjects within the French nation, the law applies. But of course, in the context of Syria, the law doesn't apply to the Syrian people, right? So this is also very revealing for us. And this is, I'm presenting you these two letters. I have only more recently started to think through them, but I wanted to present them here and continue to kind of, talk about it in the future. But one of the stories I have written already and published about was the story of this record found at the Routledge company. Their archive, it includes history of like the employees and the Routledge publishing house, the letters between employees and so on. Okay. How am I on time, by the way? Just to get a sense. I can't hear you, Dr. Hatun, sorry.
Normally the time is up, but we can't stop you. It's so interesting.
Okay, I'm glad. Okay, this is the last.
Can you wrap up within 5 minutes, please?
I'm gonna wrap up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, this, as I said, Routledge Publishing House, a letter by a Routledge employee sending the manuscript of this English language book called The Arab Woman and the Palestine Problem, written by Matil Mughannam, who wrote it in English as a way to describe the Palestinian and Arab women's movement and also the Palestinian national struggle. And she wanted to publish it in England, and it was written with an English and English-speaking American audience in mind. Routledge got a copy of this book from a feminist publisher in England, and she told them, please, you have to publish this book. Routledge sends this book to Norman Bentwich, who at the time served as the part of the British mandate system in Palestine, and he told them basically don't publish this book. So I wrote an article about this, and this is a story to show the way in which censorship and colonial censorship and Zionist narratives try to, erase the stories and the counter narratives of Arab women. And of course, the book was indeed published, and we have it, and so on. I will end basically by saying, Arabiya media history or Nasawiya media history in the end encompasses the study and relations between historical political memory and its media formations, the present political and media formations, and the strategies it takes up to sustain itself long-term for the future and effectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is such an interesting paper, Dr. Mariam. You really enlightened us about a kind of topic that's very understudied and however so much important. Yes, and excavating archives is a most interesting way to search for oneself. This reminds me, as soon as I heard that from you, of Asya Jabbar when she wanted to really find out about colonialism and women and how colonialism dealt with Algerian women. She went straight into the French archive, and started searching actually about testimonies of French people about these women to find the history of these women, which is such an interesting way of really looking for Arab women's history. So this is really an important contribution that you have presented here. I would like to open the floor for questions and comments.
If there is no question at the moment, can I just ask you about the differences between what do you see different between the work of Nahas and Zainab Fawaz, because it seems to me that both of them were interested in collecting everything about women, whether it's through a biography book or a dictionary book. So it's like similar thing. Well, what was the difference here? Are they using different women? Are they referring to only to Arab women whom they are documenting in this work, which is in itself is interesting, and it brings back the tradition of writing biography books in Islam, which is very specific to the Islamic heritage. Anyway, just your view on this.
Yeah, that's very rich. I never thought about it from that context and as part of that trajectory and style of writing. I think there's so much there. The differences I can think of right now, and again based on the ad تبع مريم نحاس, إنه she wrote about Arab and Persian women specifically, whereas Zainab Fawaz's book was about more of a global approach, so women from history wherever they may be from. And this is not necessarily to say that we are here to celebrate these specific women, but rather, and this is what Fawaz described, to fill in the gaps in the history so we can understand the events of history better if we know these profiles like this. And a lot of them, they say, and I have seen one evidence of this in Al Fatat, I believe, magazine, and a lot of these profiles, at least from Fawaz's book, were printed into magazines. So they were referenced a lot, and then people built on that, and of course, expanded on it.
Okay. Yeah, it will be interesting to make the old genealogy. I think
Ikram wants to ask a question.
Ikram, yes.
Go on, Ikram. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mariam. This is such an interesting topic, and it definitely hits very, very close to home for me and Zahia in light of French colonialism and the narration of the colonized woman. My question is more methodological. I just wanted to know if you encountered any issues accessing the archives. I know it can be a bit challenging, but were there any specific issues that you've encountered, or is there any methodological approaches that you've taken on?
Mhm. Yes, thank you so much for the question. I would say this is two sides. In terms of the Middle East context, of course, as I said, يعني أنا being trained by archival studies scholar, I believe who's here, Jamila
Yeah, thank you,
Ghaddar, works
Mariam. Both of them, and also Mariam Qaidar, uh, Nadia Qaidi.
Nadia
Such
Qaidi,
a
yes.
Okay. Nadia,
yeah.
yes, Nadia is also here. So
Yes.
they helped me get to understand, you have to talk to the archivists and to understand from them. مثلا in Egypt, just to give you an example, the American University of Cairo, it was COVID, I couldn't go there, and they were closed. They weren't accepting people. But I emailed them. I believe it was Iman. Her name is Iman and someone else. And they told me, I told them I'm doing this research. I didn't really know exactly what I was looking for, but they told me that they recently acquired Huda Sha'rawi's personal letters and archive. Huda Sha'rawi, of course, is a very prominent Egyptian feminist. At some point, the president of the Arab Women's Union, and also Egyptian. She was the elected president of the Arab Women's Union in 1940, and president of Egyptian Feminist Union. So you can know, Huda Sha'rawi is going to have a lot of correspondences and lectures, that would be very useful. So they actually digitized the entire. Actually, no, they sent me an Excel sheet with what they had, and they asked me which ones do you want us to digitize. And I felt I didn't want to ask for too much, but I asked for a lot, and they digitized everything, and they
Wow.
sent it to me. The generosity of this exchange, it's very sincere, and I appreciate it so much. And of course, this is not the case in other spaces. If I want to say, and going to the British National Archives and having like a million cameras and a screen, like watching you, putting your stuff aside, but also like reading the stuff within the space, very interesting as well. So there's different ways, but I would say again, like, tracing what you're looking for and asking people. It's really a community that does this. It's not a one-person job in that way, which is part of Arabic epistemologies and knowledge production and commitments to that. And yeah, but I want to also say that I have learned so much from the Algerian feminist movement and their ideas about liberation and justice, especially in the context of media, especially the representation of Algerian women within the French artistic tradition is very prominent, and so we should really take a good look at that within media studies. And of course, Algerian women have offered us so many counter narratives to this that I have learned a lot from. So I want to thank you and appreciate that.
Thank you. Nadia Qaidi wants to speak, and we look forward to hear you, Professor Nadia.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to meet everyone and to attend this lecture and to hear from Mariam's excellent work. I have a question, Mariam, about the methodology, and I really I'm continuing to be impressed by your care about methodology, about the respect of the process, the context, situating the record. So I want to invite you to think about what more can we do around maybe training the next generation of not only students, but also archivists, librarians, museum professionals, and curators to pay attention to that, to do some of that work in some way, not leaving it up to researchers to excavate, but really how can we think about it from a pedagogical perspective and really imbue some of the decolonial approach to archive and archiving. So I don't know if you have thoughts based on your extensive work, Mariam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we take a second question? There's another question, and then you can answer both. Thank you very much, Professor Nadia. There's a hand here, but I can't see a name.
Nasreen Hassan.
Nasreen.
تفضلي
Nasreen. Go ahead.
Thank
And
you
there's
so
also
much.
another one after her.
Thank you so much. This is the
You're
first time I
welcome.
join the
Very
series,
welcome.
and I'm glad I did because I'm a PhD student doing entrepreneurship and women in Saudi Arabia, and part of my research was actually looking at the historical economic contribution. And I did a bit of what Mariam, you have done. I went and I found some articles that were really rich, but I struggled to really get my hands on this article because it was published in an Arabic journal. There were no universities that I have access to had access to that journal. So just being part of this conversation, because like with my community, it's all like business and entrepreneurship, but being an interdisciplinary scholar, gender studies and business, I did not find the community where I can share and like listen to such struggles and such experiences where they bring these two worlds together. So thank you so much for this research, and it's nice to see that I belong. Thank you so much.
Welcome. You're very welcome. If you would like to be added to the mailing list, please put your email in the chat, and we will add you, and you will be informed about forthcoming lectures.
Yeah, this goes for everyone. Anybody who's not on
Yes.
our mailing list, please do. We
Yes.
have another. Shall we only answer these two questions, and then we'll take more questions?
Yes.
Zahia?
Okay. Yes, go ahead, Mariam.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Nadia. So happy to see you. And I want to say I wouldn't be here without Dr. Nadia. So I am very thankful for your training and mentorship. As we have learned, there's a very okay. This is a big issue in terms of education around this, around archival training and library training within the Middle East specifically, and within places like Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria specifically. And of course, there's work being done about this as part of the Fighting Erasure project that Dr. Jamila here is co-PI for. One of the things we're doing as part of this project is we do archival training for people in Gaza, Lebanon, and elsewhere in the global south. And this archival training is very important, and because of course, and I can't speak to this because it's not necessarily, I'm not an archivist, but what I have learned that it's actually very deliberate, of course, process with standards, and it's a whole knowledge system, and that needs to be trained in a way that actually serves the people within this region, and not to apply it as the history of the archival science field or the history of French archives. And I will let Nadia and Jamila talk about this. This is their thing. So what the answer to this is, we need more training, especially in our region, about how to conduct archival studies and library studies in a way that serves us.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer the second one, very happy to meet you, Nasreen. Very excited to learn more about the article that you found, and maybe we can connect somehow and see what we can do together about this, and go from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it's good. I think it's exciting to have, again, the multidisciplinary. So it's good you're there in the business, bringing that,
of course, yes,
women and gender studies element in from the Saudi perspective is very important work. So I appreciate that.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you, actually, and all of you. The next question comes from, I can't see the name, so
Rafali Fatim.
Yeah, تفضلي. And then Basma, followed by Basma. Please ask your questions one after another. تفضل
Sure.
تفضل يا
Thank
رفاقي.
you, Dr. Karim, Mariam, for the great work you're doing. So, working on archives, as mentioned by the speakers, is not an easy task, requiring movements, first of all. So you've got to move to the place and to look for the material and then start analyzing and so on. Now, my question to you, as you mentioned, you are focusing on women's experiences in Palestine, Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon, right?
More specifically, yes.
Yes, I was wondering, since you mentioned Fatima Menanisi, if you are including Moroccan women's histories, biographies, and so on. So I would like to mention a recent article entitled Moroccan Female Other Archives, which really is Fatima Menanisi's and the House of Butterfly Street. This is a very recent article published in 2026.
I can't hear you very
Rafali,
well.
we couldn't hear you well. Can you say it again? You're freezing, I think. We could not hear what you were saying.
Okay,
Oh, she's...
how about now? Is it okay?
Yes, better now. Yes, please. Go ahead. Say it
Good.
again, please.
There is an article called Moroccan Female Other Archives, Literary Activism in Fatima Mernisi's Dreams of Trespass, and Hani Alawi's House on Butterfly Street. You can find this online. What I would like to put into perspective a bit an autobiographical novel also by Layla Abu Zaid called Year of the Elephants, in which women's, especially Moroccan women's experiences are put forward. The idea, since you mentioned the Palestinian women's struggle for independence, so we did the same in Morocco. Back into when we were suffering from colonialism by the French. So it was until recently that women started speaking about their experiences going for independence. So there is like this driving thread across these women's experiences that we can maybe look for a comparative study or something. Thank you.
Thank you. Besma, تفضلي.
Well, Ramadan Kareem for everyone. And thank you for Dr. Amal and Dr. Hatou for inviting us for this fruitful webinar. Actually, you've mentioned missionary archives and colonial records describing the Arab women as lazy and they are difficult to engage or even to translate. How can we critically read these archives without reproducing the colonial bias? What methods did you use to recover the Arab women's own voices from within the colonial or beyond those records? Actually, we're studying, I'm a student, master's student in HBKU. We're studying Gulf women with Dr. Amal Malki, and we're always trying to see how the archives are raised for the woman identity, and we're trying to correct the misconceptions or the voices the colonial or the patriarchal are they using it. So I would like to hear from you so I can use it also on my assignments. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, Basma, and all the students of Dr. Amal and Amal as well. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Amal Al-Malki from Hamad University. Okay, Mariam, I think
Yes.
you have already 2 questions.
Yes. I think Fatima was the first question. Correct?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Fatima, for sharing these works from Morocco. And the thing I wanted to also include was that the fact that, women across what's known as the Arab world, as Ghada Saman says, من الوريد إلى الوريد, the common language of Arabic offers us so much in terms of how we can communicate with each other, but also share best practices and ways for justice from patriarchal, colonial, Zionist oppression together. So I think one way is the comparative thing is to, as we do, as much as we can, is to learn from these experiences together and try to kind of, advance it, accordingly. But yeah, I will check these out and hope to connect also in the future. Basma, thank you so much for your question. I love the question so much. And I want to also say hello to Dr. Amal. I always hope to meet you. I'm glad we got to interact in this session, and happy that your students are here. Okay, so how do I ensure that their voices are not erased when using those specific records? The important part of it is that we also know what. Let's talk about Syria specifically, because I gave that example about how they're saying nobody in Syria wants to translate, nobody wants to take minutes. But we know, and at the same time, there was a Syrian Women's Union. It was making very important collaborations with the Palestinian Women's Union, and they had 2 conferences. We also know that they published, their ideas in magazines. They also developed magazines. Mari Ajami, who developed Al Arus magazine, and she uses the words in a metaphoric way. Arus, her bridegroom is those that walk for justice. That's how she describes Al Arus magazine. Anyway, she wrote an article denouncing the colonial missionary woman, and she called for Syrian women not to accept to work with them. So this context, it makes it impossible for the erasure to happen, because as talking about Manal Hamzi Arabiya epistemologies, if you center Arabiya epistemologies in this research, we are using we are citing the sources as they described in their own words. So that's it.
Thank you. There's Shireen, Zubair, and Nasreen also have questions. Dr. Nadia, you put something in the chat. You were trying to say something?
It was just a link to the article that was mentioned. You cannot take the archivist or the librarian in us. We like to connect you with resources immediately. So
thank you. That's very helpful. Okay. Can we hear the questions?
Nisreen, yeah.
Nisreen,
Sure,
and Shireen Zubair. Shireen first, and then Nisreen.
I think
Go
Nisreen
ahead.
finished, I think, or
I
you
just have a
on?
comment.
Okay,
just have a
thank you.
comment
I
about
just
this.
unmuted my. Can you hear me?
Yes,
We can
yes,
hear
go
you.
ahead.
We can hear
Yeah,
you.
I'm
Yes.
trying to just to show my face just a little to. I hope you. Yeah. So
Yes, we can
yeah,
see you, and good to
yeah.
see you
Thank
again.
you. Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Good to see you too. And thank you for this series. And one last time I just missed it, just slipped my mind. I always want to come back to this series. It's so interesting, so
Thank you.
enlightening. Thank you so much, Dr. Mariam Karim, for your very enlightening presentation. Um, I have a couple of, one question. I was just wondering, as because you mentioned, perhaps you had to, because shortage of time, you couldn't elaborate the point, but in the introductory part of your presentation, you mentioned the issue of language in terms of colonialism and decolonialism. So, since it's if in the case of Morocco, for instance, I'm not I know you did not study the Moroccan archives, as I understand. You mentioned the few countries that you, but their language is different from like for the Moroccan, in the Moroccan context it would be French, which would be the language of the colonizer, and I'm not sure which languages were the colonizers in these countries that you studied, but I was wondering, how would you like to elaborate on the question of the language, because how are they, since your aim is to, as you said, is to bring out the voices to the world through the study of the archives, that Muslim women in these particularly Arab women, have been writing, and they have been they have been writing their own narratives, as you say. So, what is the role of language, and how would this research and their voices would be made available or visible, more visible to the rest of the world? Because in some parts where the English has been the language of colonizers, in countries where I come from Pakistan and India, for instance, number of right, is there any translation going on, or to bring out these archives to the world. That's my comment as well as a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Nesreen, if you could follow.
Yes, no, I wrote my comments in the text in the chat because I just wanted to comment on Besma's question. So I don't want to deviate the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else before? I think one last question, if anyone has a last question, and then Dr. Mariam will bring it to a close. No? Okay, go ahead, Mariam.
Thank you so much,
Shireen,
for the question. I appreciate it so much because you're right. I had it in the slides. I had it in my notes. I think about it all the time, but I didn't manage to get to it. So thank you for bringing it up. So there's two things I was hoping to share about the language, actually three things. First, as I said, you know, looking at Arabic language materials, but also other English and French, because those are the French a little bit, but I try, because those are the languages I am well versed in. So this is how I arrived to this. Firstly. Secondly, I'm doing this in English, okay, in Western institutions. That alone, of course, many have written about the complexities of translation, but I'm not only translating, I'm not translating literary texts per se, but also translating ideas and histories. And, you know, I'm thinking of, and I put imperialist subject production in the slides, and I was referring to Gayatri Spivak, who writes about the significance of translating the rhetoric and not only the logic. And what that means is, and she says, you know, you translate to the person that wrote it and not on behalf of them. So, but also acknowledging the fact that translation, you're always going to run into the threat of imperialist subject production. And here she talks about how a lot of third world women's texts become translated, I forgot the word, like translated in a wrong way that instead end up democratizing and forming imperialist subjects through these translations. This is an awareness we should have, and we should kind of build better translation and history writing practices to push back against them, but they are a reality and a fact that, as again Spivak says, translation is necessary but impossible. And once you acknowledge that, you do what you can within the scope. Another element of language and translation that's also maybe even more important is the ability of it to form transnational solidarities. And I go back to, again, Manal Hamzi, who talks about feminist translation as a feminist praxis, as a way of expanding feminist knowledge toward more expansive solidarities and so on. So this has been also an important element, and I can think about Marnia
Al-Azraq.
Mariam Al-Azraq, of course, has also discussed this. Yes, absolutely. And also I was thinking, Maria Hanoun, who talks about how women in Afghanistan used sources from Egyptian women's press and in their own press. And there's a lot of kind of connections there. So I just wanted to gesture to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this is a very, very interesting question. In fact, something we need to think about, not for us, but for future generations. Because, I mean, my last visit to the archive in French, the question that was asked by Shireen just made me think that possibly future generations will find that archive difficult to read, to understand and work on. So because people are moving from French, I mean, these generations in Algeria are moving away from French. So if we think about, you know, future generations in say 20 years or so, that will create another hurdle. And again, when you are looking into these archival materials, and you're reading them from a feminist, with a feminist mind and decolonial mind, it's interesting to reflect on how we read what was written in a time when decolonization was not even in the horizon. So there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done. I think we need a whole symposium about this topic. But we
And also, I
have,
didn't.
we have to go. Our time is up, and I would love to thank you profusely, Dr. Mariam, and thank all of you who have been here and contributed with your questions and comments. I would let my colleague Hatoun speak. I don't want to hijack everything. Go on, Dr. Hatoun, and thank you very much indeed.
I understand how enthusiastic you must be, because the topic has touched upon so many areas of interest regarding women's history, women's voices, women's images as well. This is another question that I haven't raised, that I was in my mind actually, about the image and how the colonial processes actually the images of women. This is also another area that needs another maybe segment of our webinars. I second Dr. Zahia's thanking to all who joined us today, and we hope that we can see you in the future. I would that our next webinar will be actually a panel. It will be a celebration of the International Women's Day, but it will be we're taking the whole of March to celebrate, because we are meeting at the end of March on, I think, the 25th, isn't it? Anyway, you will receive an invitation, and it will not be a webinar. It will be a panel of about 3 or 4 selected women from different parts of the world to join to discuss some certain issues that we hope that you will be able to join us at. With that saying that, I think we can call it. The last thing is that we're going. This session is recorded, so we will share the recording in the coming couple of days. I wonder, Dr. Mariam, if it's possible to share your presentation as well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the PowerPoint also will be shared with the recording. Thank you very much all, and we will add all your emails to our mailing list. Ramadan Kareem to all, and think we have broke just on time for everyone to go and prepare their iftar.
Food.
Thank
you so much.
Mariam.
Thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. It was an honor. Thank you.